Everything associated with catching large canal roach starts at dawn. Boat activity will be around the corner, and so taking advantage of the hour or two before that starts is essential. There is an argument for evening visits, but in my experience, boat traffic these days tends to carry on occasionally even into dark, so mornings are clearly the best bet. But the key to finding these larger roach is overcoming obstacles to enable you to be putting the bait in the right place at the right time. And key to this is location of those fish. Largely this comes from experience, as big roach pegs aren't necessarily obvious in the same way that a snaggy feature might contain perch. And once you do find them, it's certainly good advice to keep that location to yourself for obvious reasons. One thing that I have noticed over the years is that pegs that contained roach 30 years ago will still contain them now, with the difference being that 30 years ago those fish would have weighed 30 to the pound and been largely mixed species, not all roach, and today one roach could weigh a pound or more. So the present day attraction to the specialist angler is self-evident.
Like any worthwhile pursuit, however, it doesn't come without its challenges. The main one of these, of course, being the weather. And in the winter of 2017-2018, it was particularly bad. If it wasn't for frost or ice, then the water was heavily coloured or full of snow melt. But there are other hazards to overcome too. In recent times locally, it has become common practice for the lock levels to be adjusted first thing in the morning, and so often an early start can be met with a strong flow on the canal. This is particularly problematic when trying to target big roach. Another challenge occurs immediately following bankside clearance works on an annual basis, when woody stems end up floating on the surface or gathering on the bed, particularly on bends. This also occurs through the removal of branches of formerly overhanging trees which may have formed a haven for the target species. So how do we find these fish, and how big is a big roach? Well, it will come as no surprise to hear that there's no substitute for experience, as is true of most sporting activities. But it's certainly true that progress can be made more quickly by asking questions of your fellow anglers, and by visiting the canal early or late in the day when it's still, and look for topping fish. Anywhere where there's dimpled surfaces from topping roach at those times of day will be worth a try. In terms of the size of fish, then a big canal roach to my mind starts at a pound. And although this may sound like a massive canal fish, and indeed it is, they are actually relatively common in stretches where predators are prevalent, such as zander, otters and signal crayfish. So once we've found our fish, or even if we're just approaching the canal by trial and error, there is no question that the optimum technique for catching big roach is the old-fashioned lift bite method, which separates as you might say, the men from the boys in roach terms. This one, the first fish on a very cold frosty morning, is slightly below the target weight, but at least it gives the angler the confidence that those pounders might just be there waiting on that next cast. The lift bite technique is simple but very sensitive. It just requires a certain setup.
The key part is the hook length, which is £2 in the winter. I tend to use fluorocarbon so that it supposedly is invisible, or as invisible as can be. And then in the summer I'll probably go up to about £3–3.5 when the fish are less conscious of the line because the water isn't so clear. As far as the float goes, it's quite important to get the right type for this job, and so I tend to always use a cane inserted float with a balsa body like this. So you've got a long cane stem, and that's the most important aspect of this, that it gives you that ability to really pop up the lift bite to make it really obvious. The crayfish do play about with the bait on this canal, so it'll be bobbing around quite a lot on occasion, so the longer stem is better. It gives you that obvious roach bite when the whole thing suddenly appears out of the water. In terms of weight of float, the canals around here that we fish are sort of 4 to 7 feet deep, so 3 to 5 BB is about right, and with that single BB telltale on the bottom, it gives you a bulk sort of 15 inches or so above it that can be adjusted to match the depth of the water. The hook for this job needs to be a light hook, and a spade end is the best option. In this case, a medium wire hook, which gives it the strength to land the fish, because we're looking for fish that are of a reasonable size after all. In this case, it's got a beak point incurved, which really locks onto the fish and avoids any losses. In fact, the lost fish with this hook are absolutely minimal. It's incredible. And the key thing with the lightness, of course, is so that the bait will float above the bottom, whereas a specimen type hook with an eye is going to be too heavy to achieve that as well as we'd like. In the summer this would be a 14, and now at this time of year we're pretty much in the depths of winter. It's been 2 degrees minus, floating around freezing this morning, so we're on to a 16 here, and then perhaps when we have a prolonged spell of frost I'll be down to an 18. Making the hook bait is quite simple. So we're tearing a piece from the freshest part of the loaf, quite a big bit as you can see, fold it in half, and then through that fold is where the hook goes, and it makes it quite a tough hold. As you can see, it doesn't pull out at all, really solid. And you can imagine then when the shot is on the bottom, that will be popped up invitingly above it like that. And if you find that when you cast in, the cane stem on your float is all showing, then your piece of bread is probably too big and it's lifting the BB off the bottom. But ideally the size of bread we're using should be balanced against the size of the BB, so that when the fish lifts the bread off the deck, as it were, the BB lifts off the deck and it doesn't really feel anything. Right, I'd like to show you how we make the ground bait for this now. Simply 2 slices of bread and soak them in water until they stop bubbling, so all the air is out. Like so. Tip the rest away. So that's soaked for a few seconds just to make sure it's really soggy.
and then it's a case of getting your hands cold and mushing it up. So it needs to be mushed so that the crust is all broken up into relatively small pieces, and if you've managed that, then everything else will have sorted itself out into reasonably tiny parts. But you need to make sure you don't have too much water in, because it's difficult to throw if it gets a bit too soggy, and that, so you can just about roll it around in your hand, is how it needs to be. And the idea of that is that we're putting so much bait in at the initial bombardment, as they used to say, that the small fish are all choked off by the food, and all that's left, hopefully feeding when your big piece of bread is in there, is the big roach. So as you can see, the bulk shot have now settled, and by gently tightening the line you can hear the reel to the tip. We get it down so that we've got about 5mm of the float showing of the orange tip, and that's about perfect just there. So that's moved the bulk shot out of the way of the fish and set the trigger for the lift bite to occur, which hopefully will look something like this, but perhaps a bit more rapid. As far as the feed goes, I'm trying to create an area where the fish can feed over, rather than trying to concentrate the bait too much in one spot as you would if you were match fishing. So 3 balls of ground bait go in, about 1/2 metre apart, if I can get this right, in a triangle like so, and then that gives an area over which we can fish around the outside or in the centre without hopefully scaring all the fish away in one go if we get a decent fish first cast. Water clarity is a really significant factor when it comes to fishing bread on canals, and although it might be possible to catch a few small fish on bread punch in quite clear water, or even to tease out the odd fish, maybe bream, in particularly coloured water, there's no question that when visibility is between 6 and 12 inches or 15 to 30 centimetres below the surface, this is the time when the big roach will feed. It seems to give enough cover to prevent them from feeling threatened, but enough clarity for them to see the bait, pick it up and create that massive lift bite. A few thoughts have rattled around the brain about the type of rod for this job over recent years, when in the last maybe 5 to 6 years this has been something of a obsession during winter time. And initially I was hoping that the very finely tipped purpose-made canal match rod from back in the 1980s would be perfect for the job, but in practice it proved that they had insufficient backbone in that middle section to actually drag the fish away from the shoal quickly enough, given that they're larger than the fish we used to fish for in those days. And so I then went through the thought process of trying other match rods I'd got. So I tried a 13 foot, which wasn't great. I tried a 14 foot for wider stretches, but in the end concluded that the best rod all round in general was a 12 foot current day fine match rod, or a light match rod as you might call it. And this gave the backbone in the middle of the rod, drag the fish away from the shoal quickly, and then secondly it was a case of the fast tip action would hit the bite really well, and then as you play the fish that tip would continue to cushion the nodding of the head of the fish or little runs that they might make quite perfectly. As regards the reel, of course you could use any small reel up to sort of 3000 size for this job, but in my case I much prefer to use a centre pin because it gives much more direct feel of the fish when you're playing them, and when you're setting the float you can use the ratchet to just slowly tighten and get the float set perfectly with its 1/4 of an inch or 4 or 5 mil showing above the water. It would be nice to think that roach could be caught at the expense of all of the species, but of course in reality this isn't the case. Some mornings it's certainly true that bream will dominate, and very often it's a case of waiting for the bream to have had their fill before the odd roach can be caught. But of more interest is the presence of hybrids in the canal, roach-bream hybrids, the power of which is quite unbelievable. They seem to take the fighting strength of a roach and combine it to the weight and shape of a bream, such that they take on this superpower. And when they come in at this sort of size, they certainly give you a good fight. This 2 to 3 pounder can quite easily be exceeded on a canal, and it wouldn't be the first time that a 4 pounder has been caught, the power of which is quite incredible and takes quite some landing on light canal tackle. And certainly weighing in a polythene bag, previously wetted, is not an option for those fish. A red letter day with this kind of fishing might produce 4, 5 or even 6 fish over a pound. But more often than not, 1 or 2 fish will be considered a success. But on those mornings when the fish are a little more reluctant, it's usually best to feed a few swims. Certainly on iced over canals it's very unusual to catch more than 2 or 3 fish. But by moving 3 or 4 swims further along and feeding another area, leaving it for perhaps 15 minutes while the fish get accustomed to the idea, and then moving along, it is possible to catch a few more fish and make the day a little more entertaining. There have been times when I've actually roved along the canal as one might on a small stream, feeding every sort of 2nd or 3rd swim, and then moving along slowly until I find out where the fish are. And this way it's often possible to build up a reasonable catch, albeit of course you can't see them all together at the end. One thing is certain though, that having put the tactics into play and possibly endured a particularly freezing morning, there is no finer feeling than seeing the quarry slip over the net and into safety. So a lovely canal roach is carefully weighed, ready to be returned to grow bigger for another day, this one at just over the pound. And a typical example of the target species on a cold winter morning. In conclusion then, the drama of the lift bite, conveying to the angler that beneath the surface, out of sight, a specimen roach has taken the bait, and with a carefully timed, swift strike, the fish is hooked and drawn gently and skillfully away from the fed area and into the net. The sight of such a roach as this appearing at the surface is truly breathtaking. It's impossible to convey the size and grandeur of these fish on film, but in the flesh they are truly spectacular. And this fish, weighing in at £1.25, certainly goes to show that pursuing these big roach on the canals is well worth the effort.